Hey everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, we love to find fun new ways to learn English around here, and today we're going to look at using documentaries.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's something I hadn't thought much about before, but in an episode of Learning English with Sophia and James, they had some notes about it, and I thought we could dive into those a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I think documentaries are kind of a secret weapon when it comes to language learning. I mean, think about it. You're entertained.
Yeah.
You're learning about something you're interested in, and you're absorbing all this language without even realizing it.
So it's like a 2-for-1 deal, right?
Totally. I mean, you've got documentaries on literally every topic imaginable, so you're bound to find something that you're passionate about, and that's when learning really takes off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking about like the time I got totally hooked on that documentary series about ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
I was so fascinated by the stories and the visuals that I mean, I didn't even notice how much vocabulary I was picking up about, archaeology, mythology, all those ancient cultures.
It's amazing how that happens, right? Like when you're truly engaged, your brain just soaks it all up like a sponge.
Yeah, totally.
And what's really cool about documentaries is that the language is often very clear and structured. Like the narrators, they usually speak at a nice pace, enunciate clearly.
Yeah.
Which is perfect for language learners. And so many documentaries have English subtitles, which can be incredibly helpful, for connecting the spoken word with the written form.
Oh, subtitles are a game changer for sure. I used to think of those as like a crutch.
Right.
But now I see them as a valuable learning tool. You can even use them strategically, like watch with the subtitles on first to get the gist of everything. And then challenge yourself and turn them off and watch it again to see how much you understood.
That's a really smart way to use them, like training wheels for your ears. And that brings us to another really important point that came up in the notes. We were looking at active listening. It's not enough to just passively watch.
Right.
You really want to actively engage with what you're hearing.
So how can we be more active listeners when we're watching documentaries?
Well, the notes suggest focusing on key details.
Okay.
Trying to predict what the speaker is going to say next.
Right.
And summarizing the information in your own words. It's like having a conversation with the documentary. Challenging yourself to really understand and process everything.
That makes a lot of sense. I bet taking notes would be helpful too, right?
Absolutely.
Like you could pause and jot down some key phrases or words that you want to remember, kind of create your own little vocabulary glossary as you go.
Exactly. And, to take it even a step further, you could try summarizing the whole documentary out loud after you watch it, maybe to a friend or even just to yourself in the mirror.
Right.
It's great practice for speaking and helps solidify what you've learned.
That's a great tip. I love that.
Yeah.
Something else I found really interesting in those notes was the emphasis on choosing documentaries that you're genuinely interested in. I mean, it sounds obvious, right?
Right.
But I think it's so important because when you're passionate about a topic, it just makes the learning process flow so much more naturally.
It's like tapping into your intrinsic motivation. You're not learning because you have to. You're learning because you want to. And that's where the magic happens.
I love that.
And one thing that really fascinated me was that the notes specifically highlighted documentaries about wellness, things like nutrition and mindfulness meditation as being particularly beneficial for language learners.
So it's like learning English and improving your well-being at the same time.
Exactly. It's like a 2-for-1 deal.
Right.
You're exposed to vocabulary related to health and self-care, which can be incredibly empowering. Gives you the language to articulate your own experiences and goals related to wellness.
Yeah, I can see that.
And, it's not just about personal growth, it's about connecting with others too.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, imagine being able to share your insights about mindfulness or healthy living in English with people from all different cultures and backgrounds.
Right.
It opens up a whole new world of communication and connection.
I totally agree. I love that. And, speaking of connecting things together, we were talking about those subtitles earlier.
Yeah.
And I just can't emphasize enough how helpful those can be, especially when you're dealing with unfamiliar accents and pronunciations.
It's true. You can really see how the words are pronounced, even if the accent is a bit tricky at first. And you know what else you can try? You can watch with subtitles on first to get a feel for everything.
Right.
And then challenge yourself by turning them off and seeing how much you can understand just by listening.
Yeah, that's a great way to test your listening comprehension.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about choosing documentaries that we're interested in and using those subtitles strategically. But here's a fun little tip that I think you'll enjoy. It's all about extending the learning beyond the documentary itself.
Ooh, I like that. Tell me more.
So like after you've watched the documentary, what if you took it a step further and read some articles on the same topic?
Oh, wow.
Maybe watch some related films or even look for interviews with the documentary creators.
Yeah.
It's a way to deepen your understanding and really reinforce the vocabulary and the ideas that you learn from the documentary.
I love that. It's like taking the learning on an adventure, going deeper and exploring different facets of the topic.
Exactly. It's about making those connections and seeing how everything fits together.
And you know what's really cool about that approach? It helps you develop your critical thinking skills.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, you're exposed to different perspectives and different ways of looking at the same issue. And it helps you start to form your own opinions and ideas about the topic.
That's a great point. It's like turning passive viewing into an active engagement with the world.
Exactly. You're not just absorbing information, you're processing it, analyzing it, and making it your own.
I love that. So let's recap a bit. We've talked about the awesomeness of using documentaries to learn English. We've got choosing documentaries that we're passionate about,
Right.
utilizing those subtitles strategically, and then extending the learning on the documentary itself.
It's a winning combination.
Absolutely.
You know, you're entertained, you're learning, and you're expanding your horizons all at the same time.
So there you have it, folks. Another deep dive into the world of English learning.
Happy learning, everyone.
And until next time, keep those minds curious.
Absolutely. It's amazing how you can connect with people through language, even if you come from totally different backgrounds. You know, speaking of connecting and finding those documentaries that really resonate with us, there was another great point in the research about branching out and exploring different genres.
Ooh, that's interesting. You know, I tend to stick with like the same few genres that I know I like.
Yeah.
But I bet there are tons of hidden gems out there just waiting to be discovered.
Right.
What kind of genres are you thinking of?
Well, true crime is really popular these days.
Oh, yeah, it is.
And those documentaries can be a gold mine for vocabulary related to law and investigation criminal justice. Plus, they're usually really well made with captivating narratives that keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, you're right. The storytelling in those is usually incredible.
Yeah.
So much suspenseful language and all the twists and turns.
Exactly. And you know, another genre that often gets overlooked for language learning is food documentaries.
Oh, really?
Think about it. They're full of descriptions of flavors and ingredients, cooking techniques. You get a glimpse into different cultures and culinary traditions all around the world.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
I never thought of food documentaries as a language learning tool, but it makes so much sense.
It does, and it ties in with that idea of learning being driven by passion. If you're a foodie, why not dive into a documentary about your favorite cuisine?
I love that. All right, so we've talked about picking documentaries based on our interest, but what about like the actual learning process while we're watching?
Right.
Are there any specific techniques that we can use to get the most out of it?
Definitely there are. The notes mention a technique called shadowing.
Okay.
Which basically means you try to mimic the speaker in the documentary.
Oh.
You listen to their pronunciation, their intonation, their rhythm, and you try to repeat it as accurately as you can.
Shadowing, that's cool. I've heard of that, but I haven't tried it myself. I can see how that would be really good for improving your pronunciation and fluency.
Yeah.
But I bet it's pretty challenging, especially if you're still getting comfortable with English.
Well, you know, it can be a bit daunting at first, so it's important to start small. Don't try to shadow the entire documentary right away. Just pick a few short segments, maybe a sentence or two at a time, and gradually build up your stamina. And remember, it's okay to pause, rewind, and repeat as many times as you need to. The goal is just to get more and more comfortable with the sounds and the rhythms of the language.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Small wins build confidence. What about other techniques? Is there anything else you would suggest?
Well, one that I find really helpful is using transcripts. A lot of documentaries have transcripts available online.
Right.
And they can be like a gold mine for language learners.
Oh, that's interesting. I've always thought of transcripts as more of an accessibility tool. I never really considered them for language learning.
Sure.
How would you suggest using them?
Well, you can read along while you're watching, but you know, you can get even more creative than that.
Okay.
For example, you could read a section of the transcript beforehand without watching.
Okay.
and see if you can spot any words or phrases you don't recognize. Look those up, write down the definitions, and then go back and watch that part of the documentary.
Oh, wow.
Paying close attention to how those words are used in context.
That's really clever. I love that idea. It's like turning vocabulary acquisition into a little detective game.
Yeah.
And seeing how words are used in natural settings like that has got to help you remember them better, too.
It really does. It helps connect those dots between the written form and the spoken form of the language.
Yeah, for sure.
You can even use transcripts for writing practice, Try summarizing a section of the documentary in your own words using the transcript as a guide, or maybe write a short review of the documentary incorporating some of the key vocabulary you learned.
Those are such cool ideas. It's like going beyond just passively watching
Right.
and really engaging with the material on multiple levels.
Yeah.
It reminds me that learning a language is not just about memorizing a bunch of words.
Yeah.
It's about using those words to express yourself, to tell stories, to share your thoughts and ideas with the world.
Absolutely. It's about finding your voice in that new language. And documentaries with their rich content and diverse perspectives, they give you that perfect space for linguistic exploration and creativity.
That's beautiful. I love that. But let's be realistic for a minute. Are there any downsides or challenges that people might run into when they're using documentaries for language learning?
Well, yeah, there are good things to keep in mind. One challenge is the variety of accents and speaking styles you might encounter in documentaries.
Right.
I mean, you could have a narrator with a British accent, then an interviewee with an American accent, then someone else with an Australian accent, all in the same film.
Yeah.
It can be a lot to process, especially if your ear isn't used to those variations yet.
Oh, yeah. I remember watching a documentary about a global issue, and it was like a constant mental workout trying to keep up with all the different accents and dialects.
It's all part of the journey, though, right? The more you expose yourself to those different accents, the better your ear becomes at tuning in.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you're expanding your linguistic palette.
Yeah.
And developing a more nuanced understanding of how English is spoken around the world.
Exactly. It's not about trying to achieve some perfect accent. It's about appreciating the richness and diversity of how people actually speak the language.
I like that a lot. Okay, so accents, that's a good one. What else? What are some other potential challenges?
Well, another thing that can trip people up is encountering specialized vocabulary.
Oh, yeah?
Especially in documentaries that delve into specific fields like science or history or technology. You might be watching a documentary about astrophysics, and suddenly you're hit with a barrage of technical terms that you've never heard before in your life.
That can be a little overwhelming. I totally get that.
Yeah.
I remember watching this documentary about artificial intelligence, and I felt like I needed a dictionary next to me just to follow along.
Yeah.
But even though I didn't understand every single word, I still got the main ideas and learned some really fascinating stuff about AI.
That's the great thing about documentaries. Even if you don't catch every single word, they usually provide enough context for you to kind of infer the meaning of those unfamiliar words.
That's true.
And if you do come across a word that completely stumps you, don't be afraid to pause, rewind, and look it up. That's all part of the learning process.
Yeah, it's like a fun little treasure hunt.
Totally.
Discovering new words and expanding your vocabulary one documentary at a time.
It's an adventure. Okay, so we've got those unfamiliar accents and the specialized vocabulary. Anything else we should be prepared for?
Well, you know how we were just talking about the different accents and the specialized vocabulary? There's another thing to be aware of, and this is something to keep in mind with really any learning resource. It's the potential for bias.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, even documentaries that are focused on factual topics, they're often told from a particular perspective.
Right. It's easy to assume that documentaries are objective, but they're still shaped by the filmmakers' choices in the interviews. They include the narrative they're trying to build. Exactly. So it's always good to be a critical viewer. Ask yourself questions like, who made this documentary? What are their potential biases? Are there other viewpoints that aren't being represented?
Those are really important questions to keep in mind. It's about engaging with the material actively instead of just passively taking everything in.
I agree. And that's a good practice for anything we watch or read, not just documentaries.
Absolutely.
Critical thinking is a valuable skill no matter what you're doing.
For sure.
Now, to get back to your original question about challenges, one thing that can be tough for language learners is the pace of some documentaries.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely noticed that. Some of them are just so fast-paced and packed with information
Yeah,
that it could be hard to keep up if you're not totally fluent in English yet.
it's true. And that's why it's important to find documentaries that are appropriate for your level.
Right.
You know, if you're a beginner, you might want to start with documentaries that have a clear narrator and a slower pace.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you get more comfortable with the language, you can gradually challenge yourself with more complex and fast-paced films.
It's like choosing the right hiking trail. You know, you don't want to start by climbing Mount Everest.
Exactly. You got to set yourself up for success. Find that sweet spot where you're challenged but not overwhelmed. And don't forget, you can always pause, rewind, watch sections multiple times if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
There's no shame in taking your time and really absorbing the material.
That's such a good point. It's all about finding the right approach for you.
Exactly.
Some people might prefer to watch with subtitles, while others might want to take notes or even try that shadowing technique we talked about.
Right.
It's all about experimenting and figuring out what clicks best with your learning style.
I love that. You know, speaking of different approaches, one tip that I always recommend is to create what I call a documentary learning routine.
Ooh, a documentary learning routine. I like that. Tell me more.
Well, it's about incorporating documentaries into your language learning in a way that's deliberate and consistent. So, for example, you could set aside a specific time each week to watch a documentary. Maybe it's Tuesday evenings or Sunday afternoons, whatever works for you.
Right.
And then you can really make it special. Treat it like a date with yourself for language learning.
I love that. Okay, so I've got my documentary date on the calendar.
Mhm.
What else can I do to make this routine really effective?
Well, you can build in some pre-watching activities.
Oh,
So, for example, you can read a short article about the topic of the documentary just to familiarize yourself with some key vocabulary. Or you could watch the trailer to get a sense of the storyline, the style of the film.
those are great ideas. It's like setting the stage for a more immersive experience.
Yeah.
And it probably makes the documentary more enjoyable too, having that background knowledge going in.
Exactly. And then after you've watched the documentary, you can do some follow-up activities to reinforce what you've learned.
Okay, like what?
Well, you could write a summary of the key points. You could discuss the documentary with a language partner, maybe do some research online to delve deeper into the topic.
Yeah, I love that idea of taking the learning beyond the documentary itself. It's like creating a ripple effect where the knowledge keeps expanding outwards.
It's all about turning that single documentary into a springboard for all sorts of learning experiences.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on documentaries as language learning tools.
Me too.
But before we wrap up, I have to ask, do you have any specific documentaries that you would recommend for our listeners who are ready to get started with this?
Oh, there's so many good ones out there. It's hard to choose.
I know, right?
But let's start with a few that are really captivating and accessible for language learners.
Okay, perfect. What are your top picks?
Well, if you're into nature and wildlife, you can't go wrong with Planet Earth 2.
Oh, that's a classic.
The cinematography is just breathtaking, and David Attenborough's narration is incredible.
Oh, yeah. I remember being totally mesmerized by the footage of those birds of paradise.
Oh, it's stunning.
Yeah.
Another good one for nature lovers is My Octopus Teacher.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
It's this beautifully filmed story about a filmmaker's friendship with an octopus.
Wow.
You'll learn so much about these amazing creatures, and the story is so heartwarming.
It sounds incredible. I'm definitely going to check that one out.
You should. Now, if you're a history buff, I highly recommend The Civil War by Ken Burns.
Oh, yeah. Ken Burns is amazing.
It's such a comprehensive and moving look at one of the most important periods in American history. You really feel like you're transported back in time.
His documentaries are always so well researched and beautifully done.
I know, it's really impressive. Okay, and if you're interested in exploring different cultures, I recommend Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
It's a fascinating look into the world of this renowned sushi chef in Tokyo.
So you get a behind-the-scenes peek at a different culture through the lens of food.
Exactly. It's beautifully shot, and you'll pick up some great vocabulary related to Japanese cuisine.
Awesome.
And for anyone who's into personal growth and well-being, I highly recommend The Mind Explained.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
It's a series on Netflix that explores all these different aspects of the human mind, from memory and dreams to anxiety and mindfulness.
I'm adding that to my list right now. You know what I love about all these recommendations is that they're not just educational. They're entertaining and thought-provoking too.
That's the key, right? Learning should be enjoyable. And documentaries are just such a fantastic way to engage your curiosity, learn new things, and boost your language skills all at the same time.
Well said. Wow, this has been such a fun and informative deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
It's been my pleasure.
I feel like we've learned so much about using documentaries as powerful tools for learning English. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with before we sign off?
Just a reminder that this is really just the beginning of your documentary adventure. There are so many incredible films out there waiting to be discovered. So explore different genres, follow your passions, and don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone.
Love it.
You never know what amazing things you might learn along the way.
That's a great point. It's all about embracing the journey and the joy of learning.
Absolutely. Every documentary is a chance to learn, to grow, and to connect with the world in a new way.
So well said. All right, folks, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope you feel inspired to start your own language learning adventure with documentaries. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep those minds curious. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next time.